hands. Who writes Android apps for a living here? Okay, so almost all of you. So you should know that writing apps for a startup, for a small company, or even like a big company where the mobile business is kind of the side business, is not the same to write apps in a company where the mobile app is the business. It really changes the amount of investment you get on the app, the sizes of the team, and that brings on a lot of issues and good things too that you just wouldn't know about if you're just working in a small team, like say 5-6 people. So this is what we want to talk about tonight. And the first thing we want to do is let these awesome guys introduce themselves. So can you please, we're going to go like in a line like that. Can you please just tell the crowd your name, where you work, and kind of a rough idea of the scale that you have to deal with on a day-to-day. That can be like, you know, a number of developers on Android, or any other metric that you might be interested in, maybe number of modules in your app, maybe the time it takes to compile your app. That's also a very good metric. It usually gives a good idea. So let's go in the line here.
All right. Is this okay? So my name is Andreas. I work for Uber at the new e-mobility team, which is the team working on bikes and scooters. I recently joined Uber actually for 6 months. My previous experience was at Facebook, which is on a different level of scale, I guess, as well. So I can give you some of the numbers of both, I guess. So at Uber, I pulled up the commits, the commit log. So we have last month 185 committers. One of them was the bot, so 184.
Hey, just one bot?
Yeah, just one bot.
Okay, 184 committers.
Yeah, and then 20 of them had only one commit, so they don't count as well. So 150.
one commit can break everything, so
That's
they
true,
count.
Right. And then the commit volume was 1,500 per month. And then that's almost now basically almost an order of magnitude less than Facebook, which had like 700 committers on Android. And I guess the commit volume was a lot higher as well.
Wow. All right.
The build time, we use bugs, so for incremental changes is pretty okay. Like if you only touch one library, 10 seconds for the library, and then another 30 to install the app with EXO. Which is actually roughly what it was equivalent at Facebook as well.
Okay. We'll talk about build systems as well, because you're already bragging on your build systems.
You said also module amounts. I think our repo has like between 5,000 and 10,000. Facebook had like 100,000 overall, but the main app was about 30,000 in Java and another 30,000 in native stuff.
Wow. All right.
Yeah.
All right. So Uber representing over here. What about Pinterest?
Yeah, my name is Torben. I work here at Pinterest. I've been at Pinterest around 3.5 years. Been doing Android around 7.5 years. Our scale is we have around 35 people committing code to the code base. The product overall, the whole Pinterest product has, I think, 250 million active users. And the app, based on the Play Store, has around over 100 million installs. So that's the scale. Modules, nothing like like Uber. We're using Gradle, and until recently, the more modules you had wasn't really an impact on your build time. So maybe 20, 30 at most. Still very few.
That's reasonable.
Build times. If you change, I think, XML file, maybe 15 seconds. If you change some other code, maybe 30 seconds to a minute for me. Do a release build, I think, is 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay, cool. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Sorry, no. I did turn it on. All right, is it? No? Oops. My hands. Is this better? There we go. My name's Zach. I work at Square. I've been there for about 4 years. And
And I'm impressed that y'all memorized all those stats. I had to write them down.
That was impressive.
So in the last month, we had about 60 committers. We've got about 400 modules. And our build times, incremental, we use Buck. We use Gradle with OKBuck and Buck. So for a given module, it's like pretty quick, a couple of seconds maybe. And our average like CI build time to like for a successful CI build is about 2 hours. So it's a little bit higher. That includes like, UI test running and all that stuff as well. We also shard our CI, and no one talked about that, but we've got about 115 different shards running in CI, and I think that's all of it. So.
Okay, so 60 contributors, right?
Yeah, 60.
Okay. All right, let's talk about Twitter.
Hi. It works. Yeah.
It works.
Yeah. So I'm Cesar from Twitter. I've been at Twitter for 6 years, and let me see. So we have 40 to 50 contributors, I think, per month. We have trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head. Around 1,000 commits per month. In terms of lines of code, it's I think around 1 million lines. 2 million with generated code. Have 120 modules. What else? And in terms of users, we have 150 million users per month. So yeah.
You say 40 to 50?
Yes, 50 contributors.
50?
Yeah.
Okay. So as you can see here, this is kind of the scale that we're dealing with here. You still hear me? So like Pinterest, Twitter, like between 30 and 50. Uber really is they have way more, right? Like it's Square, you said 60, right? And Uber, what, 180. So that's also almost double. So you're gonna
count the one commit.
Fine.
Like those might be like iOS engineers that just try to double and see how great Android is.
So just to get a feel, like, who's used to this scale here? That's true. We can get into that detail. That's a good point. The question, like, how many apps are these teams dealing with? Because that obviously like changes the equation. But just to get a feel here, how many of you have like teams of like more working on Android? Okay, so like maybe like 8. I'm assuming everybody else is less than that. Okay, which is the don't get me wrong, I have not seen it less than 20. But so what we wanted to kind of talk about here and try to spread the knowledge here. By the way, this is why we're doing a panel too, is to get like insights and real world stories, something that you know don't have to like go through HR to give in a presentation. We want to hear like the real day-to-day, like what's it like from the inside, working teams of like hundreds. So we're gonna split it out into two big topics. First topic is gonna be code, like entry specific things first. And we're gonna go over questions there. If you guys have questions, I'll put this in your questions as well. And then the second I want to talk a bit about organization, like how the teams that size kind of organize themselves, share knowledge, etc. So let's talk about code. Say I'm a new hire, right, in your one of your companies, and I know Android pretty well. Like I know Android, vanilla Android, no problem, right? What is it about your like my first day that I'm gonna have to learn to just write a new feature, write code? Like what is specific about you guys' code base that is not like classic vanilla Android, but you have to know to commit code into the code base? Who wants to start? We can do it in order, or
I can
if you guys
start
are
with this one.
inspired, go ahead.
Vanilla Android. What's that? I've never. Yeah.
The stuff you can read on the internet.
Yeah. So we definitely like tend to work pretty removed from that day to day. We've written at least one of our own like navigation libraries and stuff. So like single activity, and we've kind of abstracted everything else away. So I work on the point of sale app, which is like it's not really a consumer facing app, which makes it a little bit different maybe. Yeah, so you'll have like the same app open. It's a pretty big app. There's lots of stuff to do, and it'll be open like kind of exclusively for usually a longer period of time. So it's a little bit different than like where you're like interacting with like a lot of like system notifications and stuff like that. But yeah, we're pretty far removed. So we have like our own internal like architecture, like libraries and patterns and stuff like that. So we've got a decent set of training materials on that. We've done talks. We have like recorded videos. We've got like a course. So there's a lot to pick up. So it's yeah, and we're always trying to like think through how to improve the training as well.
Yeah. So are you saying that first day, like say I'm used to my own patterns or whatever, like maybe I'm following Google exclusively, I'm doing like architecture components and all that. Am I going to be able to use any of that in your code base, or do I have to learn a new pattern entirely?
We don't use a lot of architecture components in the point of sale app. We do tend to follow a lot of like just standard software engineering patterns and stuff like that. So stuff you've probably seen before, but we don't. I think Square is often like not necessarily just like followed the Google recommendation. So we kind of like we got off fragments pretty early on. So yeah, it's pretty different.
No fragments at Square?
I don't think I've ever seen a fragment.
There you go, guys. It's actually a nice thing, honestly. All right, who wants to go next?
Yeah, so at Pinterest, I think you definitely have to like learn a few things as well. Like common architecture patterns, like most screens are set up at this point with like MVP, so you may know it, but you might still have to learn how we do it, or the intricacies of the system. Yeah, navigation we handle differently. We also only have one activity, and then we call them fragments, but they're kind of like just views underneath. Models are another thing. So yeah, I mean, we have a lot of things documented on the wiki, so I think that will get you a good start. We try to pair someone up with a mentor, and through just like bug fixing things around the app, you may get a good introduction to that, and then you have your team to rely on if you get stuck. So
okay,
but yeah, it's probably also not your vanilla like side project app.
I see. Just quick follow up on that. Like, say I come in Pinterest, I'm pretty good at Android, right? Like, I can pick up your MVP pattern pretty quickly. I write my feature, or like maybe something that PM asks me to do real quick. Do I just like, or maybe not something a PM came in, but maybe it's like my own, like I want to improve this. Can I just like commit it and ship it?
No, you cannot just push to master.
Okay.
Well, there's a code review process.
Yeah.
You go through that. Ideally, if it's like something new completely, somebody in a team can probably help you. If you're touching an existing surface, there are owners for that, so they would review your code.
Okay.
Theoretically, then you can push to master after that if it's accepted.
If the code is reasonable, I can push it and ship it.
Yes.
To 100 million users.
You can wrap it in experiments as well.
So there's experimentation. Okay.
There's experimentation, and it's also used for gatekeeping, depending on what kind of like gating you're used to.
Okay. And is that something easy to pick up? Like, do I have to like learn the whole pipeline of how your experimentation system works, or is it easy for me to just?
If you just want to gate a feature, yeah, it's easy.
Okay.
we have, I mean, you set up the experiment, and then there's a unique name for that. You'll add that to the code base. You build the app. We generate some methods for that you can call and check whether somebody's in that, and with that, activate it. Or
okay, so there's some code generation to do it and stuff. Nice. It's pretty cool. All right. What about Twitter? Do I have to learn anything that's not something I can learn on the internet to build the future on Twitter? By the way, full disclosure, I used to work at Twitter, so
yeah,
I can ask the mean questions.
I didn't know whether I was meant to pretend. Yeah, so the application has been in development for 8 years, and we run into many of the issues that architecture components are meant to address way before Google started to provide solutions. So we had many internal solutions for them that are very effective, and it's hard to justify that we would rewrite everything on this new system. Sometimes it's even the case that what we have written has been battle tested for several years already, and it's hard to justify to replace it with something that's just created. Also, we understand the value of using existing technologies. So RxJava or Dagger, those types of, or Square libraries, those types of libraries that are pretty much a standard, we adopt whenever possible. But yeah, it's unavoidable that at this level of complexity, there is a lot that you need to learn, not just because it's Android, but rather because it's an application of 150 modules, and there's a lot of complexity in there that you don't have to learn whether you like it or not.
Well, at least like RxJava, Dagger, like Square libraries, I feel like that's something that
It's not entirely unfamiliar.
Decent Android developer should know. So that's good that you're comfortable finding that in a big app like Twitter. Okay, let's talk about Uber a little bit. And I want to ask you because you said you work on the
e-mobility.
The e-mobility. So it's kind of a new project, right? So you're starting fresh there, right? So how much of that baggage that Cesar was talking about do you have in those new apps? Like when you create a new app at that scale, like can you just go vanilla Android, or do what you like use the new tech that comes in, like Kotlin, direct-to-egress Java, or do you use your internal because it's already so baked in that you just want to go fast and do it?
Got it. So we're also single activity architecture.
Yeah.
We have our own architecture framework called the RIBs. So that's kind of like a MVP pattern.
Yeah, that's the same that Uber uses.
Yeah,
like the main Uber app, right?
Exactly.
Yep.
So that's and then we, apart from that, we pretty much use standard open source libraries. So Dagger, Rx, Java a lot. So you would be so as long as you follow what the RIB architecture pattern suggests to do, then you would be able to, let's say, get started pretty easily. Our UI layer is standard Android with XMLs and resources. So you should ramp up pretty quickly on that. So for the new apps, just because of familiarity and tooling, we also decided to use kind of like the same components. We're in the phase where we're evaluating Kotlin, and we use it for a lot of our tooling. We have the runtime in the apps right now, and we're evaluating what's the best way to start using it basically for features.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can also tell you the Facebook story, which is completely different.
let's hear the Facebook story.
Right.
How much custom is there?
Is everything custom? Basically.
Do you even if you open like the code base,
and you don't recognize anything.
Yeah, you don't recognize that it's Android, right? It could be anything.
They use fragments, unlike because they're older app, so they use fragments. Although they use it more as a kind of like as a activity replacement.
Okay.
Because they have some cases where they host the fragments in something other than activities. Let's say the bubbles, for example, in chat heads. But apart from that, custom GI framework, no Rx Java. They're still pretty much Java 7, so no lambdas and stuff. at least in the main apps, right? Messenger, FB, 4A.
Yeah.
They have their own UI framework, which is Litho. That's open source, but not. I guess it's not standard yet. So you would have to learn a lot before you can be productive in the code base.
While you were working at Facebook, did you hear like complaints of new hires being like, well, I'm supposed to know Android and like I need to kind of relearn basically a new framework for everything? Were people complaining about that, or they were just excited to learn something new?
Yeah, it's always a concern, but I mean, and some of those are technically legacy in that there have been replacement, but just trying to replace like a framework within, let's say, the main app, which is a behemoth, is a really hard. It's a big undertaking. So the benefits of the new framework will really have to be much more than what you would get just for developer productivity.
Yeah,
at least in the short term, right? Because after 6 months, you're kind of used to the code base, and you're probably as productive as you.
I see. So it needs to be like
the
return needs to be higher than the cost that is to migrate.
It's a conscious trade-off, which you can do when you have like 400 million users daily versus the development time of 100 developers. Like it doesn't matter, basically, or it matters less, right? Because the users go first in that case.
Okay. All right. So that was kind of like an overview of how like the code looks like. One thing that I really like about that scale, like I remember at Twitter, is the tooling. At big companies, you have enough people that can work on just making your developer life easier every day. And that's something like you never have the time to do in a smaller team. So I miss a lot of the tooling right now compared to like the scale that I had before. And so I want to hear a little bit about you guys' like favorite tools that really you think makes everybody's life more productive, at least in the team, and maybe like kind of describe it, the pipeline that you have to actually like commit code and everything that kind of triggers after committing code. To like ensure nothing's breaking, the quality, all this stuff, all these tools that you basically add on to your normal workflow as a small Android developer that you might have no idea that it even exists. Who wants to take on like any tooling that you can think of that you think is cool and like you would miss it if you don't have it right now?
So the biggest thing for me would be just Kotlin. We started using Kotlin. We kind of greenlighted it for everybody about a year ago, and we did a Kotlin day where we kind of like did a training session for a whole day and tried to like ramp people up if they hadn't played with it already. And since then, like I almost like we have a ton of Java still in our code base, but pretty much all new code is Kotlin. And we're using a lot of the new patterns that we're working with, and some of the new libraries that we're working on are heavily reliant on like stuff that Kotlin lets you do. Like steel classes are a great example of that. You can basically kind of like define immutable value types and like union types and stuff like that, and combined with stuff like RxJava, gives you a lot of really cool tools. RxJava is another one, but Kotlin, having a language that allows you to do a lot, kind of more, have the compiler do a lot more checking for you and stuff like that. It's even without all the nice like syntactic sugar and stuff like that, having just a compiler that's a little bit more powerful has been made a huge difference. So
Kotlin is awesome. I think we can all agree there. But like that's something I can pick up on my own, even on my personal projects, right? What's something at Square that like really like improve your productivity and that you would miss at another company?
I have to think about that a little bit.
Okay. Anyone has something like that?
So I know that something.
So,
Going to you. So something that we do is we have custom lint rules, many custom lint rules that get built automatically in the and checks tell as well, KTL and KTLint. And something that that we found in a large team like this is that you want to implement any code policies, any particular guidelines, just telling people this is what you should do never works. So having the ability to write these detectors very easily in a way that they get picked up by the build and executed automatically on the whole of the team is very convenient.
That's an interesting point. I guess with that many people, everybody has their own preferences, their own style, etc. So, do you all have tools to enforce like style, kind of, I don't know, general patterns, maybe custom lint rules, like stuff that I can think of?
too many rules sometimes.
Too many rules.
Yeah, but there are rules that enforce style, enforce throw errors when specific bugs, let's say in the UI layer, are in. Like, let's say one of the most common one is using theme attributes in non-vector drawables or stuff in API 19. That's the one I hate the most because I always forget them. So things like that. So you can enforce a lot of things and styling and these small things is for API compatibility is one of the most common use cases.
And those like rules and checks and stuff, do they run before pushing any code? Do they run on a CI, like as part of the CI, or?
Yeah, they usually run as part of the CI.
Part of the CI. Yeah. Okay.
We also have error prone in order to run some of checks as an extension of the compiler, but those are limited. It's not too many. There are a lot
smaller.
Yeah, so we have Nullaway, which is our local nullability checker within error prone.
Okay. So let's talk about CI actually a little bit. Oh, actually no. Go ahead, please.
Yeah. We also have different. So we run some lint checks before even sending your code for review, mainly around styling. Then once it's actually, we use Fabricator, so we diff it out to Fabricator, kind of like creating a PR. Then the CI kicks in and runs more lint rules, a lot of custom rules as well. The one I particularly like the best is if I use a new method in the SDK and don't guard it. It alerts me. I think that's very helpful. It helps me not to break the app in production when I only test on 9, but this runs on 5. So
nice.
And on top of that, once things actually get committed to master, we run a performance test and UI integration tests. So it tests for, does the app even start? Do the as display? Is the metric monitoring correct? So those kind of things that I would probably never set up if I was building my own small app.
Yeah, so that's the kind of thing, like just having a performance test run on every commit, that's so valuable. Does it get broken a lot, like this performance test? Has it been helpful? Has it catched issues?
Yes, we catch them both internally. So for that, we use NimbleDroid, so we can see it before it even goes out to the public. But then some of the metrics also run live in production, so we can see when a new release goes out, does the time it takes to load home feed, for example, have a regression, and then we can investigate.
Okay, all right. So yeah, I wanted to talk about build systems and CI a little bit because I know it's a pretty hot topic. People have strong opinions on Gradle, and I know big companies tend to kind of try different build systems. So anyone wants to talk about their experience with Gradle or another build system and the differences and what any war stories there? Was there any issues?
So we have done a bit of experimenting. We started using Buck with OKBuck, as I mentioned, 2 years ago, I think now. We had reached a point where even though like we don't have like hundreds of thousands of modules, our builds were just taking so long that it was like impossible to like iterate on unit tests and stuff. So we just kind of dropped everything for a month and had a team just start experimenting with stuff and see what worked. Someone tried Buck, and with Buck caching and stuff like that, we ended up going that route. So we've been doing that now for 2 years. We're starting to play with Bazel a little bit. It seems like it's getting more mature. Yeah, so Buck's been really great. For incremental build, it's super fast. EXO is great for like just running the app. And there's been like when you have like Gradle and OKBuck, which just takes, if you're not familiar, OKBuck takes your Gradle build scripts and then like generates Buck rules from those, and then runs Buck. You run Buck on top of that. So there's a lot of different moving parts, and that definitely can cause some headaches sometimes. Buck's support for Kotlin isn't that great, but just it builds so fast that like it's kind of been like, well, it's too bad, but at least I can run my tests all the time.
All right. Well, at Pinterest, what build system do you use?
We use Gradle.
Yeah.
It works.
So how many modules did you say you had? Roughly, like
20, 30.
20, 30? Okay.
I would still say like the main project or the main module is the biggest one.
Right.
The app was originally started in 2012, so that was very different times, I would say, and like splitting and how the code was written is very hard to actually like pull it apart.
Mm-hmm.
We've been slowly working on that, but we're not near on the scale of the modules some other companies. I would say that I think this year Gradle has been much better. We originally introduced Kotlin in the middle of 2016, and through probably like most of 17. A lot of times the build would break, Gradle would break, and so in the end it was like, is this actually a real failure? Is this just something in Gradle not working well with KBT?
Yeah.
In that sense, Gradle has, I think, improved vastly, and it's working pretty well for us.
Still working pretty good for you. Okay. I know that Twitter uses Gradle as well, right? So that still works fine at your scale, 120 modules.
It does. It was on the verge of falling apart at the time of 2.2. Understood 2.2, and it was 3.0 started to put it on track. And I find that the last year it's been getting consistently better. You need to be on top of the all of the latest versions, and sometimes it's painful because the first the betas or the release candidates typically kind of rough. But then if you don't try them out, then you can be pretty sure that there will be bugs that you will have to deal with. So it takes effort to keep up with the latest tooling, but it's been getting consistently better.
It feels like also like the scale of the apps have been growing so fast, like faster than the build system have been keeping up with that scale. It felt like 2 years ago even or something, like even Google wasn't like, they were surprised that the builds wouldn't work for a company like Uber, for example.
Well, they were doing a lot of dumb stuff, to be clear. So there was a lot of low-hanging fruit that they could have.
Oh, really? So let's talk about Uber, actually. Do you guys use Gradle?
Well, we use Gradle scripts. So we also use we use also Buck, and we transform the Gradle scripts to Buck, and then we run Buck.
Any pinpoints, any complaints from the developers?
The OKBuck part itself is becoming somewhat of a bottleneck. So I think we're going away from that and into pure Buck in the near future, and we're also considering Bazel for down the road.
All right. What about like doesn't that limit a lot the Kotlin adoption? So much on Buck?
Yes. So currently, Kotlin support is all community-based basically for Buck. So that's definitely a limiting factor. But on the other hand, you still need to run, the code base with a bunch of engineers hammering new stuff. So the trade-off for the faster builds there is significant.
Actually, so Buck is maintained by Facebook, right?
Correct.
Was there any like pushback or like politics involved for trying to use Facebook's own build system
In Uber?
at other companies than Facebook, obviously?
Yeah, I wouldn't know because that decision was made before my time there, but I would assume so.
Yeah. What about Square? Did the engineers just be like, "Hey, look at the build times. Like, there's no brainer."
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
That's pretty much exactly what happened.
All right. Do you think now with the improvements of Gradle and Android Studio, like you would consider maybe like, are you still kind of keeping a benchmark of what Gradle does and considering?
Yeah, so we still run Gradle builds in CI and occasionally like locally as well.
Okay.
We haven't put a lot of effort into like optimizing our Gradle builds specifically for Gradle, so it's hard to compare directly.
Got it.
We've kind of like we switched to Bucket and then everything was so fast. It's like, okay, cool, we can like focus on other things. So we've been like investing more in like building out CI tooling and stuff like that because Buck has basically just been kind of doing it for us for now.
All right. Yeah, that's definitely something like a new engineer would have to learn. I mean, I feel like we all know Gradle, like you have to know Gradle, but you don't have to know Buck or Bazel. So that's interesting.
Nice thing about like OK Buck is you like everything
that does the bridge. Yeah, that
so
was a good move.
Feels familiar, and then
okay, I'm gonna accelerate a little bit. Last questions on the code, and then I just want to like give a chance for people to ask questions too. Unlike these giant code bases with lots of people, how do you do like changes that touches the whole code base? Like say you need to upgrade the library, something that really breaks the API and that was heavily used, right? Or like you refactor like a really core component that touches everything. How do you even do that when there's like 80 other people trying to like commit at the same time? What are the strategies there? And like, do you have any like anecdotes or stories, crazy stuff that you had to do? Any big migrations lately that you had to do?
I don't think we do anything that's special. We rely a lot on like deprecation. So we'll like deprecate stuff and then move things incrementally. So I mentioned earlier that we had about like 60 committers in the last month. It's not like, so those are split up into a lot smaller teams. There's usually about like 3 to 5 engineers on one team. So one thing that we'll do, and like the team that I'm on is does a lot of this, like where we try to coordinate with other teams to do these sort of things. So we will say like, okay, we're going to upgrade a library or we're going to do something new. So we'll like deprecate the old stuff, mark it as deprecated, and once we've made sure that people can start using the new stuff, and then we'll kind of live with that 2 versions of something for a while, and then we will make a bunch of JIRAs and then try to like triage them out to teams and try to get like buy-in and like commitments from other teams to work on their stuff. So it's basically like a team effort. Like so my team will kind of like coordinate stuff, and then other teams just have to like chip in and help. It's like the only way to do it.
Got it. Okay. Any other strategies you guys have found?
So I think that first you need to have that kind of culture in your team where people are willing and looking forward to migrations. And then I think it's about planning so that you can figure out how to do it in parallel and how to do it incrementally. Where in a smaller team, you may just put up a huge patch that's updating everything, right, and be done with it. And if we were to do that, we would be fixing bugs for weeks. So we migrated to ArcJava 2. And that was, I think, one of the worst migrations that we had, because it's not just changing the APIs. Also, it's introducing this new restriction that you cannot use null items, right? And that was incredibly hard. So we broke it down into very small patches and then distributed the work to all of the teams.
Okay. So that collaboration, I guess, is really important, like giving the work to other people so you don't have to do it.
Yeah, but that's why what I said earlier about making sure that people want to do it is so critical, because otherwise you cannot really ask people to potentially introduce bugs and go through all this effort.
Do you guys have any? Go ahead.
During my time here at Pinterest, I don't think we have run into a problem with upgrading a library, like going from Dagger 1 to 2 or RxJava to 2. We started with the latest ones. But for example, when we upgrade like the support library, one person might spearhead that, but then it gets communicated out, so everybody using parts of the support library can keep an eye out doing like
checking their stuff.
doing the next release to make sure everything is still working.
Yeah.
When it comes to other migrations, such as from like maybe our non-existing prior framework on how we build screens to using MVP, when we convert a particular surface, if it's important enough, for example, like the main feed or the detail screen, those are behind the experimentation to make sure that the metrics match up.
So again, side by side and deprecate, replace slowly. Okay. Did you have something to add?
Yeah. So what was mentioned before is mostly the strategies that go on. Incrementality is one. Good planning, good communication with other teams. I mean, in the end, the platform team or the equivalent thereof, or the one guy who's the platform team for smaller teams, is going to be on the hook for it.
Right.
So the more he can farm out the job to other people through leadership, the better it is for him. In my experience, it usually in the end, like you can get to like 80% with that strategy. The final 20%, you might have to, dig deep in order to just do it and get it over with. Just because the benefit as you go towards the end, basically the incremental benefits of, let's say, moving one more thing into the latest library are down. Like especially if you are out of the core path, right? So at some point, somebody has to just dig in and just remove it, and then celebrate.
And that's
celebration is actually pretty important. I think that works. It's like, guys, or send out like a progress update. Like, hey, we moved, let's say 80 out of 120 remaining. Just get everybody involved so that, and then once we do the last one, we're gonna have a big party and kill RX1 with fire.
That's a good reason to go to the end of the tunnel.
Definitely I just wanted to say, like, agree with the celebration thing. So like one thing that my team has occasionally done is like we'll hand out like stickers, just like some like cute little laptop sticker or something like that. So like we'll like make up 50 Jiras or something like that, and then if you every time you like knock one of those off in your spare time or like while you're waiting for other things to build or something, we'll give you a sticker. And and we have some like extra big stickers too if you do like a whole bunch.
It's a nice way to say carrot. Just follow the carrot.
They're actually like carrot stickers.
Actually, Andrea, Zach was telling me about the Android X migration you guys did recently. So even like in my small apps, I like dread doing this migration. It seems like anything could break, and it's not really that much return on investment so far. You guys just migrated to Android X, right?
Yep.
How did you even do that?
So you started with a good plan, and Zach is pretty good at that. So he has. So they did a bunch of scripting in order to make sure that they can do the changes. They leveraged IntelliJ a lot to do the refactoring of the package names. And then, so if there are no functional changes, or you don't expect there to be functional changes, it's technically easier for you because you can just do like a code swap basically and be done with it. And then you just do it. So that's we also have like a code freeze right now. We don't release a new app during holidays. Yeah,
so that's a good time to
do it. It's a good time to maybe try it out, have a couple more weeks to do testing, make sure that although technically I don't think there is a revert strategy for these things, right? So you do it and then you commit that you're going to fix the issues before you screw everything.
Wow.
So you're committed.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
One thing that is interesting with that is we actually didn't use the Studio Android X migrator. We wrote our own script. And if people are interested in seeing that open source, you should let me know and I can mention that to the guy that wrote it. We basically just had one.
I'm interested.
Yeah, we basically just had like one guy steamrolled this through last weekend and had like a 16,000 file change commit. And so far,
Yep, that does make people really happy to have to merge
Think like-
conflict,
Oh yeah,
all this
that's
stuff.
yeah. One point on is that so they had to stop everybody else from committing in order to get it done.
For how long?
For about 6 hours or so. So they did it over Friday night.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I feel like 6 hours
Yeah.
is reasonable.
Yeah. So,
Friday night too.
so and the good thing is though culturally they were still able to do it. At Facebook, for example, they wouldn't allow you to stop everybody
For
and
6
do
hours.
your thing.
Too much
So,
money, man.
yeah, exactly. So they would say, do it incrementally and then come and talk to us. So basically, the golden rule of refactors was that you had to submit between like the sweet spot between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. because that's when everybody in the US was asleep and London hasn't started working yet. So that was the sweet spot to land those changes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jesus. See, this is why you have to deal with at that scale, man. Wake up in the middle of the night to push your refactor. No. All right. Does anyone have any question on like coding, Android patterns, everything? Yeah. In the back.
What do you guys use for the data store? SQLite, Couch, Bell, what's your experience?
Yeah. Question on data stores. Do you use any of the vanilla or libraries, maybe from Square? Or do you have your own?
We use SQLite,
SQLite?
and Realm for different things.
Realm as well? Oh, interesting.
Only vote for type ahead.
For type ahead, huh?
The search
For
bar,
the speed? Okay.
Bootstrap. So
All right. Did Realm been working for you for a while?
on that surface, yes.
On that surface. Okay. All right. What about Twitter? What does Twitter use for those beautiful tweets that we read every day?
We use SQLite as well.
Yeah.
But we have a library wrapping it that's similar to Boom, since at that scale, manipulating untyped data.
Yeah.
Yeah, manipulating
it was rooms
untyped.
before rooms. I remember.
Yeah, it was room before room.
room.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's cool. Well,
Yeah,
that's
we use sometimes just like plain SQLite, and then
Yeah.
obviously like SQLite and SQLite and stuff occasionally as well.
all the Square
Yeah,
Labs.
mix of everything, yeah.
Obviously. Nice. What about Uber?
Uber also uses some SQLite, although we don't store that much data from what I know on the.
Yeah, it's pretty live.
Because it's very real time. The app is very real time, so a lot of
Makes sense.
just is transient data that lives in memory.
What about Facebook? Facebook use SQLite?
Yeah, they use SQLite. They use a lot
Their
of things.
own,
They have their own thing. So I think the GraphQL model was being recently migrated to native. So I think they actually have a custom scheme where they store it because it's all flat buffers now. So I think they're all serialized in the file system.
Okay. Wow. All right. Any other questions from the others? Yeah.
You guys mentioned experimentation and feature flagging, especially with speed code changes earlier. I would imagine if you're flagging a lot of code changes, of course, building up a lot of these feature flags, maybe hundreds or thousands. I know in our app, our like feature flag manifest is like 75 kilobytes or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any best practices for putting that up over time or sort of deprecating old experiments?
Yeah. So
So from an organizational perspective, so I try not to consider the feature complete until I clean up the feature flag. So and I try to push that against planning and roadmap, where basically and especially at the end of because we do reviews and things like every 6 months. Our goal is basically start fresh or as much fresh as we can at the start of the 6-month cycle. So we evaluate the flags we have now. Do we need them? And we try to remove them. And then there's an aspect on the performance of the feature flag system itself. If you store all of those in memory or things like that, at some point, like at the 10,000 scale, it's not going to work out. So you put it, let's say again, serialized byte format in the file system or things like that.
Yeah, we have a rule or a little output during the build that warns you that there's over 100. that was put in place when we were always below 100. I think now we're somewhere between 100 and 200. But yeah, it's up to each engineer to actually remove them afterwards. There's nothing that's automated that does that for you later. But yeah, it's part of shipping your feature or your little change in the end. It's also cleaning that up. Yeah.
Anything to add, you guys? You're good?
It's pretty much the same for us. It's kind of like individual responsibility.
Up to the engineers.
Yeah, we've done occasionally, like we'll do just like sweeps where we go through everything and like just clean stuff up in waves, but there's no like really solid fixed practice around doing it regularly.
I guess that what we do is we clean up aggressively, and also we have the tooling to extract the actual flags that are used. But also we take a snapshot of the manifest at the time of the build, so that at runtime we only have to deliver anything that has changed. So we may have our manifest maybe 50K, but we only deliver a couple of Ks to the application. So.
I actually heard at DroidCon SF like 3 weeks ago, there was a talk from Uber from Gotham that works on their CI, that they said that I don't know if they're using it right now or they're putting it in soon, something that kind of fetches all the experiments, looks how old they are, and if they're more than 3 months old, basically they try to automate the pull request that's gonna like remove all the ifs, basically flatten all the ifs. That's pretty cool. I thought that was pretty awesome. Automating that would be really sweet, because then you're like, you don't have to talk to a PM like, hey, can I remove this? It's like, nope, the 3 months, you're done, you know? So I highly suggest you look at that talk. Yeah. Last question before we move to organization real quick. Yeah.
Just wanted to talk about more of architecture perspective. So we have like a lot of like MVVM, MVP. So just wanted to get your perspective on like as code scales more. I know Uber has ribs recently, and then there is Viper in talk as well. So as and when your code grows, is there anything specific you see a drawback or like a reason to move away from MVP into like say ribs or Viper, or would you also recommend using or do you see pitfalls on the MVVM? That's the question.
So we on the point of sale app, probably the widest pattern that we use there is basically MVP, using libraries called like Mortar and Flow, and that worked really well for a while. I think that's what we moved to after we got off of fragments. But we started running into issues where it was hard to, like, for really complicated flows where there was like lots of like conditional like navigation and stuff, because our app is largely like form based. Like you know, see a screen and then you go through a couple other screens to fill something out, and then you're done. So that pattern is really common, like just navigationally. So for really complex flows like that, it got kind of hard to follow. Like, okay, so like there's a little bit of the navigation logic in every presenter, and it's all kind of like all this logic is like split around, and it's really hard to follow and like figure out exactly what the flow is at a high level. So we've been kind of moving towards a more like React Redux style unidirectional data flow, where we've got like a central state machine that just doesn't have anything to do with UI. It just, you know, moves through states, handles events, and then you know, down the road we turn that into like, well, which screen should I show? What should I show on the screen? Stuff like that. And so we're like basically like all my team is working on right now is like moving towards that, moving in that direction. And you know, we're have a lot of other teams that are also kind of like new code. A lot of new code is being written that way, and it makes a lot of things easier to reason about. I think our app is maybe a little, it's like definitely different than like the Uber, like at least the rider app, or like because it is very much like form based. Like for example, if you're checking a customer out, you go through like the payment flow, and you're like, well, is it like a card or cash? And like there's like 10 different options, and then you have to go through all these different screens, and there's like just the navigation logic of like which sequence of like 20 screens to go through is really complicated. So having like being able to like separate that state machine out and handle that and test that on its own is really important.
Yeah. I mean, the main reason, I'll be quick. The main reason I was asking is that as the team grows, there is a lot of temptation to like make these helpers and manager classes. In theory, although they work, they essentially break the architecture and pattern you're trying to follow that leverages and like makes your life easier in general. It's like easy for them like to make a helper class or manager class and be done with it, and then like down the line a year later when their like other person explains like what the heck is going on.
Yeah, so we have we have definitely have a couple of cases where we've kind of like tried different patterns of that and like kind of one-off done some things. Another thing that we have to do is like take the same flow and like put it in multiple places. And so when you do that, and then you're trying to like, okay, I want to take this whole thing maybe with like maybe a little bit of custom navigation stuff and like lift it up and like put it somewhere else in the app. But it's not super clear like how everything plugs in. It's really hard. Whereas like if you've just got like a pure state machine, you can just be like, all right, I'm just going to lift that up and put it over here. Maybe I'll use the same like layout files. Maybe I'll use different ones, but it's really clear where that boundary is.
But yeah, I hear you on following the patterns, and like as more people come in, especially with different levels, it's like tempting to not follow the pattern because maybe it's like a bit more cumbersome, but you pay the price definitely later. But I think like, correct me if I'm wrong, but basically in big code bases like this, you basically see a pattern repeated everywhere, and it's basically just natural as a human to just like follow patterns, right? So it's like I feel like it gets rarer and rarer that you diverge from the pattern to do your one-off thing when everybody else is doing kind of the same, following the same thing. And I mean, these guys are very strong, like core teams that kind of really think about these patterns. They make it so easy to use that there's no reason to go around. All right, we took a bit longer than I thought on this, but I did want to touch a little bit on organization because I think it's really important topic, even though it goes a little bit beyond pure Android and pure coding. But I want to know, like from the outside perspective, you always hear like big teams like that are organized. Basically, you have a core team that does the infrastructure, and then you have feature teams, right? With like 2, 3, maybe 4 developers on each feature. Is that the model that you are currently operating with? All of you?
Yeah, kind of like that. We have the core team, core experience.
Yeah.
There's one part to that works on the infrastructure.
Yeah.
Another part to that works on like core screens that are not maintained by any of the feature teams.
Oh, interesting.
And then there's also a growth team that also have engineers.
Sure.
On the feature teams itself, probably like 1 or 2 less people.
Okay. So the people who are doing the core screens, is that part of a framework team or a core team? Like, are you guys together with the infra team, or?
They're on the core experience. So
they have their own team. Interesting. Yeah. How many people is that?
4 or 5.
4 or 5. That's pretty cool. That's the first time I hear someone that really is focused on just maintaining the core, just the core flows. Yeah. Because we always want to add features, add. And sometimes like we kind of forget about just like the main entry points, which are 99% of the time spent, right? So that's cool.
And they're not just maintaining them, they're also improving them. So like the pin closer, which is the detailed screen or your profile itself, or maybe how you save an object within Pinterest. So.
All right. What about you guys? Same kind of deal? Core team or infra team, feature teams?
Yes, but not entirely.
Okay.
Meaning that it's typical, particularly as you're growing an organization, that feature teams will pop up in many teams, and they will just start contributing to the application without much collaboration among them.
Yeah.
And that's where we were 3 or 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we did is we reshuffled the whole of the team into a new organization where all of the engineers are reporting into one single engineer manager. So they are working very closely together. And the infra work is distributed to all of the teams. So there is a foundation team, but there is no expectation that all of the infra work will be done by that single team because it doesn't scale anymore.
Yeah.
So we did that as we scaled. First, to make sure that technical debt and infra was well distributed, and also to encourage collaboration. Because that's one of the things that we noticed as we went from 10 to 20 people. It was not working anymore. Is that people were not talking to each other. They were not learning from each other, and that just didn't work in a larger team.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. The point of sale team has been traditionally very much like that, where we like don't really have. Actually, for like a long time, we didn't even have like a core like foundation team or like a platform team. Everything was just distributed to different feature teams and stuff. That has changed in the last couple of years. Just like there's certain things that it's hard to like that don't really have clear ownership, and it's hard to distribute. Like you need a centralized kind of owner for that stuff. So the team I'm on was kind of formed to like deal with that. But like we talked about earlier, like a lot of what we do is like, okay, we'll like coordinate stuff, but then like distribute the work out to everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
So that's that we work that way a lot.
Okay.
Yeah. So we also have a distinction between feature teams and platform teams. So the feature teams is where you're going to see they're more feature-faced, as in they need to develop specific screens. They deal with the UI layer.
Yep.
And they're co-organized with their iOS counterparts. So and then you have mobile platform, which is responsible basically for the health of the ecosystem. So they deal mostly with frameworks that the feature teams are using, general health of the code base, code base structure. There are also and the tooling teams then are also different, right? So there is a dev experience team that deals with tooling for CI, the tooling for Android development and things like that. And then I guess so. The next evolution of that, as you grow, I think, is that you have. So at Facebook, they don't have teams that. After the feature teams, the platform is not integrated as in iOS and Android. They're completely separate. You have one team supporting every library or framework, let's say, that you have. So, a team supports Redux, a team supports Litho, things like that, and those can be distributed all over the world. And then what was unique there, I think, is you have this kind of task forces that are formed, let's say, on a 2-year basis in order to fix a particular problem. So, for example, there was one task force that was created just to reduce Android build times end to end. So they went, from the compiler up to the CI. They looked at everything, and they evaluate. First, you start with 2 people. You evaluate what you should be doing, and then they recruit, let's say, other engineers in order to do it. You end up with, let's say, with a team of 5 people for 2 years. And we also did that for performance metrics, let's say. So there was one team that was formed at some point that was there that just looked at cold startup performance, right? What steps we need to do in order to reduce cold start. And that's another. And they either developed features themselves, or they went and made recommendations, and they tried to get feature teams to do some aspects.
That's interesting to just like form kind of teams on the fly just for one issue.
One thing, if I could just add something really quick. So you mentioned people talking to each other, and like people would stop talking to each other, and that was a problem. So one thing that is that we try to emphasize a lot is pair programming. A lot of people on my team kind of split their time doing, going off and like actually writing code sometimes. But we spend a lot of time just like embedding with other teams and pairing with other people on other teams, helping solve problems or like teaching. And then also like someone comes and like, hey, how do I do this? We're like, oh, you should pair with like so-and-so on this other team. They have just done something similar. You should talk to each other and share knowledge. So like a big part of like our foundation team's job is like just embedding with other teams and kind of that like, it's a lot of talking.
Yeah, that was going to be my follow-up actually, because generally with those structures, because you're kind of like siloed into you doing your own surface, you tend to like kind of not talk to each other and like kind of lose touch with the rest of your Android folks, right? And definitely I agree that pair programming, I found that that's the most efficient way to transfer knowledge. And it's like completely impromptu, very natural, like, hey, do you know you could do it this way? Like, oh, like it just happens. But how do you organize that? Because like what I found at least is that some people are kind of intimidated to pair program, and also like it takes a lot of time out of you, right? So do you guys have like a systematic thing? Is it like every day on Tuesday everybody pair programs, or how does that work?
So we have every week we've got like a 2-3 hour like office hours thing that my team kind of does. Like we host it, and then people can come and just sit and work on stuff, ask questions, pair with us, pair with other people. But pair programming has always been like a really fundamental part of like Square's engineering culture. So we just try to encourage it a lot. And definitely like when I started, I hadn't done that much pair programming, and I was certainly intimidated and like I can't think when I'm like
watched, right?
Yeah, I
it
can't
feels
type.
like you're
I'm
being
like,
watched.
how do I like what's an IDE? So it definitely took some like time to get used to, but especially like for certain problems where you're trying to like just think through something new, look at some new code, being able to just like talk with someone, bounce ideas off them. You learn new like shortcuts. You learn different like features of the language you didn't know about or something like that. And it's like a different style of working, and it can take some time to ramp up. But like I'm definitely not like as like pure lines of code productive when I'm pair programming. I write slower, I think slower and stuff, but you think in a different way and you can like solve different kinds of problems that way.
Yeah, so pair programming is definitely a way to like kind of help teams communicate around. Is there any other things that you found that kind of break those silos and bring feature teams together, or like people cross teams to kind of chat and share their problems and how to do things?
So at 35 people,
Yeah.
we get together every other week.
Okay.
To talk about changes, maybe for some framework, or somebody finished up a new feature, they will demo it.
So that's the whole Android team.
Yeah. Across
every 2 weeks?
Yes.
You meet? Okay.
And then the other part is we have a Slack channel, just for the Android team itself. But then, I don't know, a few months ago, we started it where there's always 2 people on duty or on call every week. So that if somebody has a question, they can tag Android help, and one of the 2 should respond, and you can have a conversation around what they're trying to do. In addition to that, there's an office hour where you can actually go and talk to them in person. And so that was kind of to solve the problem where maybe only 1, 2, or 3 people were sort of the people that everybody would go to, and this way it spreads across the whole team, and also helps other people to grow. Like, let's say you don't know the answer, but you're gonna go look for it, and then you can give it to the other person, or you learn from each other. So that's working for us right now.
Okay, cool. What about Uber? Is there any office hours, any pair programming? Do you guys do that?
We don't do pair programming. We do office hours though, and we have the Slack channel, or our equivalent of chat, where there's a lot of volume, but you can figure out interesting things. You can always ask a question. We have an internal Stack Overflow where we have a lot of information. Although the discoverability of that is a bit hard. I actually like what we had at Facebook, where we had an internal Facebook version. It's called Workplace. It's also something you can get for your company. So you have a feed version of a ranked and algorithmically ranked version of feed, where you can subscribe to a bunch of groups depending on the topic of interest, and you can get a lot of good information over there.
Okay.
So those are a couple of things. The other thing that I think is important is both at Uber and at Facebook, mentoring from senior engineers to junior engineers is part of the review and the core competencies that an engineer should have. So it might not get you a promotion just on that, but it's definitely enhancing your profile. So a lot of senior people do spend time trying to either ramp up or help junior people evolve.
All right. Twitter, anything like that?
We have group coding sessions.
Group coding sessions?
Yeah, did you
I
set
wonder
them
who
up?
started that. Do you still do it?
You're like, do you happen to have something else? Yeah, so Joaquin started group coding sessions that have been very, very successful.
It's still happening?
Yeah,
That's amazing.
They're still ongoing. Yeah, and also we have many Slack channels for many different types of topics. So there is an Arx Java channel or a Dagger channel. Also, I think that part of it is making sure that collaborating is fun, right? And that people have opportunities to talk to each other while having fun. So I think that one of the channels that's most successful that we have is Android Lounge. I think that the motto is the snarkier, the better. And people just come into that channel to talk about everything Android or non-Android related. And that's been very effective in getting people to know each other.
Yeah, I know. So the group coding sessions, because maybe you guys don't know what that means. It's just like, I think it was 1 hour booked every week. So you just book a room, and anybody who wants to like code, not just at their desk, but with a bunch of people, goes in the room and just codes. And generally, like, it's a lot of fun. Generally, like, there's a lot of communication happening very naturally. There's another thing that I know that Twitter does, which I was a little bit jealous of because it happened just before I left, is the Android dessert rotation. I saw those on Twitter all the time. I'm so jealous. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So this is just a group of 20 people or so that come together for a dessert every Friday or every 2 weeks. So you are each week someone's on the hook for feeding everyone else.
So easy, guys. Like, where do we even just give food to people?
They will
hug together. And kumbaya, everybody's happy. All right. It's getting a little bit late, so I wanted to give like just 5 minutes for you guys questions if you have any more, and otherwise we're gonna ramp it up. Yeah. So
I want to phrase the teams how. Suppose that one team wants to do Rx Java and MVVM, another team wants to do coroutines and MVP. Would that be allowed?
Would that be allowed in any of your companies? Do 2 different patterns in parallel? Yeah, it all depends on how strong. Sorry, the question was, what if one team wants to really push MVP and the other team wants to really push another pattern like MVVM or something? Can both live in parallel in the code base, or does one have to win and the other just?
So that has definitely come up a couple times. Not necessarily with like MVVM versus MVP, but like React Native versus like actual native apps and stuff like that. And there's like, it's never just as simple as like, oh, I want to use this. It's like there's a lot of reasons why a team wants to use a specific technology. So understanding what those reasons are is always a good first step. There's probably some pain point that they feel isn't being addressed. So in that case, it's like, all right, well, there's something that we can maybe do to help with that. Because there's especially like once you get bigger, there's a ton of value in consistency, being able to move between teams, read other people's code, and that is super important. So we value that very highly and try to stay as consistent as possible, as consistent as you can be in like a million lines of code. But yeah, like if that comes up, it's like, okay, so like why is there this discrepancy? And one of the things that we try to do is not just say like, no, you can't do this. You have to do it this way because this is what we've decided. It's understand like why you want to do something else, and then try to make the recommended way, pleasant enough and fun or easy enough that people want to use it. So that, but yeah, like ultimately, like if that comes up, it's like understanding why and then trying to address that like the root issue, because consistency is like super valuable.
Yeah. Yeah, over there.
So let's say if you have to implement some new UI project. So what do you generally do? You go for a third-party library to look for it, or your first idea to go ahead and write the own? If you do go for a third-party library, what are the process that your company comes to do that? Like as an individual developer, can I just look for a library and add it on my own, or is there a process that I have to go through?
Yeah, that's a great question. What's the process for adding a third-party library if you want to use it for your feature?
Yeah, we have a process for that. So if you evaluate a few third-party libraries or maybe just one, you can submit a document to this email alias. There's a few of us on there, and there's some things that we ask for you, like for example, how much does it add to the APK? What's the increase in method counts? How maintained is this? Are there any other known issues that might cause us a problem? And so if you go through those steps, then there's a discussion around that, and based on that, it's either allowed or not. But yeah, you can't just add a new external dependency. It will always go through a review, basically.
So code review is the only check with which you ensure that the person is not adding a third-party library, or would you like even stop the developer from directly accessing JCenter or VN Central or Google directly? Like you would have your own mirrors.
It's not the code review, it's like the review of adding a new technology. That's what we call it. But yeah, at code review time, somebody would detect that you're adding something to your Gradle dependencies. But I don't think we have anything automated that would block you from doing that. So.
There are a couple of things that we look at when we consider new libraries that are particularly relevant at scale. One is, what is this library? Is this reasonable to expect that's going to be maintained for the foreseeable future? Because you adopt one of these libraries and then you end up depending on it in like a million places, you're not going to be able to get away with it. The second thing is, if this is a paid library or a paid SDK, what kind of leverage are we giving that company over us? Because it's typically they would give us the best deal when we first adopt it, right? But maybe in 2 years, when we have to renegotiate, they will be in a position to ask for anything. So yeah, just something to consider at scale.
Probably good to look at security too. Usually there's a security review for your external dependency. That's always a pain. But yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, how would you describe the methodologies that you're using? Is it like Agile Scrum or some version of that or something radically different? So how do you handle dependencies?
Yeah. The question is like on the methodology of projects management. Is it agile? Is it cascade? You have docs and designs before building, or building before specs, or how does that work?
A mixed bag.
A mixed bag.
Well, there is an aspirational target and the reality, I guess. So we try to have a formal review process. How rigorous that is varies depending on what you're trying to build. For things that are cross teams and how they have dependencies, it's more rigorous. So you have to write some design document that will get posted to the email group. People will start commenting on it. That should iron out like the big problems with it, and then it also goes through a small committee that looks for like consistency or making final trade-offs if there are particular trade-offs to be made. And as obviously, like for the smaller the feature and the change that you want to introduce, the less rigorous that is. Up to the point when if you need to do it fast, then we just rely on the code review in order to conform to specs.
So I think there were maybe two questions there. One was like doing design versus implementation, and the other one was like process work management stuff. So we really like design docs. We rely on design docs a lot, especially for feature development. We've got like a template that you can use, and we try to we can compare like if we're doing separate designs for Android and iOS, like where the differences are. So the normal process for that is like you'll write a design doc for a feature or some change you're doing, which may be 18 pages if it's a huge thing or really important, and you're really thorough. And it might be 1 page if you're doing something simple or quick. We use Google Docs a lot, and so just get your thoughts down, and then usually we'll send it out to a small group, maybe your immediate team. Give those people a chance to comment on it, discuss it, and then we'll send it out to a much larger group, like the entire like Android group, and then let that go through a process of commenting and discussion. So that'll sometimes happen before implementation or at the same time. It's a useful process just for documenting the decisions that are being made, even if like you're updating it as you go. So we do that a lot, and we'll have meetings where you just like sit in a meeting and like all like comment on the same doc together and stuff sometimes. Although I guess management does that more than engineering. But on the other side, Scrum versus whatever, it's kind of up to the individual teams. So and we like to experiment a lot. So I've been on teams where we've done something that's pretty close to Scrum, not exactly. We just kind of like do whatever works for us. So we'll do that for maybe a couple months, and then we'll look at it and be like, okay, what's working about this process? What's not working? Let's iterate and change the process. I think most teams at Square tend to do that. So it's like you might start with Scrum and then just like try to improve on it. If something is just process for the sake of process, it's not adding any value, you get rid of it. My team just recently, in the last couple of months, switched to more of like a Kanban sort of thing, because the work we're doing is not really like, it doesn't really fit into sprints. So, and that's been really good. Yeah, the biggest thing is like, try something. If it works, keep what works, change what doesn't.
In general, how long are the sprints in your companies? So like 2 weeks?
Again, it's usually like up to individual teams, but it tends to be 2 weeks.
Yeah. 2 weeks is the kind of.
We also do 2-week release cadences, so that lines up nicely.
So it lines up. That's generally kind of the case, yeah.
Yeah, we started actually, I started on a brand new feature at the beginning of this year, and the initial sprints were 6 weeks.
Okay.
And we later moved to 4 weeks, and we stayed with 4 weeks.
Okay. A bit slower. That's nice. You get to build bigger
stuff. At the beginning,
stuff.
there was a lot more meaty things to build. So there was a lot less like needing to get together again and plan. And then even towards the end now of this year, there were 4 weeks, but we actually like swapped things around in the middle of it. But the entire team has to actually agree that that's something we want to swap out. It's just that, when you start out and there's a lot to build, it's much easier to go longer. When you're much more in the end, like fine-tuning a feature and going for like improving metrics, you have more to like swap out and iterate on.
But the Pinterest app ships every 4 weeks too, or?
Ships every week.
Every week, okay.
And I mean, different teams across different orgs do it differently. I think a lot of teams now do sprints, either, I think 4 weeks. They do stand-ups in person or on Slack.
Yeah.
So 2 weeks. So.
Cool. All right. Go ahead.
So as apps get quite large, there's a lot of code written. There can be some teams that build really useful like data providers or services or just interesting code that other teams may find useful. I'm curious if scaled organizations have tools or process around discoverability of common code.
Yeah, that's a good question. How do people find these cool classes that our team write that could solve your issue, but you don't know, you don't even know it exists to start with?
So I think that you need to write those components for reuse. So I couldn't, just because someone built this component that seems to be generic enough in this other module, I would not be able to use it just because their plan for evolution in the future may diverge from my needs. What we have been doing that has worked quite well for us is to build a well-defined set of layers, or to break down your code base into layers, into modules that are specifically designed for reuse. So that if someone has a utility of a certain nature, there's always a well-defined module where they can add it. And also in code review, we encourage that those modules, whenever they are generic enough, are moved into those layers. So you sort of need to build for reuse, and you need to build it into your architecture.
Yeah, if you a good thing to strive for is to build everything that to build for reusability, and that because that will help you to make better design decisions anyway. In the majority of the cases, also I think it works really well if that part is also tied to compensation again and promotions. Basically, senior engineers are expected that they have cross team impact. And one way to do that is if you write reusable components that other teams use, right? So,
yeah, the discoverability is always an issue.
Yeah. So if you put it at least in common and it's designed to be reusable, then it's a lot easier to reuse it. Sure. Then the discoverability, yeah, it's the bigger frameworks, they're announced very vocally.
Sure.
The smaller ones, if you want other people to see it, like you can try to do it, promote it by yourself. But you need to do some kind of promotion.
Yeah. So you need to advertise it.
Yeah.
So what's up?
Kind of on the tangent, the application I work on just has a couple modules. As we get more and more, what are best practices that we should have for committing to different modules, building those modules, and also versioning them? Just curious. You guys have any recommendations?
Yeah. Any recommendations on like what to put in what module and when to break it into two modules and
always break them.
Yeah.
So
is a module like one class or
not one class, but 5 to 6 coherent classes. So RIB architecture is pretty good at that because the RIB is a component unit. So all the classes that belong to one RIB, which is like 4 of them basically, they go into one component, and then you can make that component a library. So it has a very clear API, both in terms of the code base it exposes a particular interface, but also it's actually a single buck module or a Gradle library, and so it's isolated from the build system as well.
But so like for you guys, one module is like one component in a screen.
Yes,
basically.
Exactly. Yeah. If you so the RIB architecture helps with that. If you make it a RIB, make it a library. So one component, if it's a RIB, you put it in a library. You have usually some foundational libraries, let's say some shared UI components, even in your feature, right? So let's say within your organization, you probably reuse some specific widget. You probably reuse the same language. Let's say in bikes and scooters, you talk about bikes and scooters. You have a bunch of strings about bikes and scooters, right? So you put those in a library, things like that, and then you reuse those across your the libraries that implement your components.
So you would do a module just for strings, for example?
Yeah, I have a module just for strings.
That's interesting.
Considering your scale, do you typically develop custom analytics tools or rely on third party for analytics purposes?
Yeah, analytics is always a big one. I feel like everybody has their own custom sauce. Do you guys use any third-party analytics, or is it all in-house?
We use like Bugsnag for like crash reporting and stuff like that. And then like I think we build some custom stuff on top of that that like data analysts use. As an engineer, like I'm always looking at like crash reports in Bugsnag. And we have one other custom like generic kind of remote logging framework just for like logging random events and stuff that we use for some things. So it's kind of a mix.
Yeah, events or analytics around like the application itself. For the features, we have an internal system. If it's something you just want to track, maybe the number of times something went wrong, or something that you don't want to track through like our internal system, I've been pushing people to use the Fabric events.
Fabric events, okay.
There's Firebase Analytics now that integrates directly with BigQuery, and that looks like a really good option. Yeah.
Is Twitter using Firebase?
We are looking into adopting it. So we are adopting BigQuery and the new integration with Crashlytics. And Firebase Analytics looks like a really powerful tool for that purpose.
Okay, cool.
I wanted to add, by the way, to your question. Here's one split that we do that has been extremely effective. We have for our libraries, we split between core libraries and Twitter-specific libraries. And we started doing that from like 4 or 5 years ago. So that has enforced that has forced us to keep to think carefully about which code that we are writing is fully generic and not tied to Twitter at all. And I think that we have at this point, we have like 50 or 60 libraries that are entirely independent of Twitter and that we are able to share with Periscope. So that's, if you can start doing that now, I think that you'll get a lot of benefit down the line.
Cool. And one more?
How much architectural parity is there between Android and iOS devices?
So the question is how much like common kind of patterns, architecture patterns between the two platforms. So I know that Uber.
Yeah. So the RIB framework is it was designed to be cross-platform. So relative at the feature level, at least, relatively big code big parity. Maybe not all the components are designed the same way, but if you wanted to do it in the team, you would be able to do it. Like, so you could go into the design document and say, hey, we're all gonna create this and this and this component, and then we like both teams, iOS and Android, can implement the same structure basically. Okay. And then using RX Java also helps with that, since you can use it both sides. So a lot of the interfaces between the components are reactive based.
Okay.
Whether they're gonna, so there are different styles on how what kind of methodology to use for the interfaces, let's say between different components. Sometimes reactive is too heavyweight for some simple interfaces. So for that, you can just use a simple listener. But there are more complex cases where a stream makes more sense.
I wanted to ask actually Square, because I know that, so from the outside, like Square looks like a really strong Android team. Do you guys like share that all this knowledge and all these good engineers that you have with the iOS? Like, do you help the iOS guys?
Knowledge, yes, but we like to keep the engineers on the Android. So yeah, I think that probably maybe the reason for that is just like people on the Android team have been really passionate about like open source and stuff, so they're more visible. But yeah, architecturally, the two platforms have traditionally been pretty divergent. I mentioned design docs earlier, and something that'll often happen is like a feature will get designed for iOS and Android, and you can look at the design docs and see they're similar or different. Usually, whichever one goes second will use the first one for inspiration. So there's some similarities, but like the just the frameworks are so different. So one thing that we like in our latest, I mentioned we're moving away from MVP to more like a Redux style thing that we call workflows. And one of our goals with that was to not necessarily share code between Android and iOS, but share terminology and like architectural shape. So you can design a feature and talk about the components and stuff. And they're the same for both platforms. They might be different implementations and stuff. But on both platforms, it's going to be like unidirectional. You're going to have events flowing in. You're going to have a state machine. You're going to have screens and view stuff like flowing out. So even though like the implementations are slightly different, as long as you get the terminology the same and people can talk about the same words. For a while there, we even used different terms to refer to like types of screens. So like a dialogue, like one platform would call a sheet and the other would call a card, and that was just like the designers couldn't even like talk to each other, and that was very confusing. So keeping terminology the same is super important, even if the actual implementations of the libraries are slightly different.
Yeah.
And kind of like as an aside on that note, we've occasionally played with actually sharing code, and usually the overhead of trying to deal with the build systems for that and debugging and all that, like it's just not worth it. So the sweet spot that we've kind of found is like have the terminology and the shape the same, and then
Nice.
Yeah, ours are also completely different from an architecture standpoint. I would agree with Zach what he said as far as like keeping the terminology the same, as well as when it comes, for example, to like your event names, keep those like platform agnostic, so things not called a cell when you work on Android, for example. But yeah, otherwise the two apps are, or the two code bases are very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, guys, it's getting pretty late, so we went way over time. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and you learned a lot. And this is the last meetup of the year, guys. So
is it actually? I just want to ask one thing. Is it too late for me to ask one question for the other panelists?
Oh, please do.
I was really curious what people are doing for QA, and like so we've talked about some testing stuff, but do you have manual QA? How do you do kind of like smoke testing and that sort of stuff?
No, that's a good one.
Yeah, we have manual QA in-house as well as abroad as well. And then we have UI integration tests as well. So between those, if you work on a new, or if you build a new feature, you generally put together a test plan, and that one gets manually executed. If it's some core flow, then it will be automated.
This is all in-house QA?
The one that's abroad is outsourced.
Yeah.
We have QA, a QA team and offshore QA team that's running their crazy test plans. And then we have dog food and alpha and beta, and it so happens that we build an application that people use at all times during the day. So yes,
helps find bugs.
That works really well.
Nice.
Yeah, we do rely mostly on unit tests, but we have some custom QA and some UI testing automatically. The best here though is Facebook, that has the alpha channel 200,000 people, beta channel 1 million people.
that catches all the bugs, for sure.
So that's pretty good.
200,000 on the alpha.
200,000 on master, so they get the master. Yeah, they get a crash like
every day,
every other day. But,
yeah, I used to be on the alpha for a little bit. I was like,
but if you have a nice product and people are committed, they do it, and then you get all the metrics.
That's cool.
Yeah, so they can at that point you can do a lot of interesting stuff with performance optimizations too, and so they leverage that a lot. But
no, it's helpful to add that scale of users. Definitely, you don't need QA if you have 200,000 alpha testers. All right, guys, we're gonna close it up because it's getting late, and Petra's probably gonna want to close the space. Thank you all for coming. You guys have a whole awesome end of the year, and we'll see you in January for more meetups. And thank you guys for participating. This was awesome. Stop talk.
I don't get myself here. I don't get myself here with other companies at this scale. That we are running in the same situation.